Scientific progress is constantly changing all of our lives in one way or another. It's virtually impossible to catalog the unending discoveries across all fields. So it may come as a surprise to learn that just 3 years ago, according to a global survey conducted by 3M, as many as 4 in 10 people around the world didn't think science made much of a difference in their lives. You may be scratching your head wondering, how can that be?
In 2018, there was 4 out of 10 who said if science didn't exist, their lives would be no different. And 32% called themselves science skeptics. And in that population, 6 out of 10 said if science didn't exist, their lives would be no different. And now get this, they were taking the survey on their, laptops or mobile phones. So you see what the problem is, that science is invisible, science is underappreciated, and science is taken for granted.
That's Dr. Jayshree Seth, Chief Science Advocate at 3M Corporation and holder of 65 patents for her scientific inventions. Over the last few years, 3M conducted a global survey called the State of Science Index. It polled 14 countries with 1,000 participants from each to find out how a diverse set of people viewed the field. While the company originally planned to release their findings in early 2020, the pandemic threw a wrench in that timeline.
It seemed like the world had just been turned upside down by the global pandemic. And we obviously looked at that and thought, this has had to have an impact on how we think about science. So just the results that were so recent seemed like they would be quite detached from what's happening in the world at that moment.
So the scientists went back to the drawing board and conducted another survey during the pandemic in order to ensure accurate results. What did they find? More people around the world are shifting to believe that science does play a big role in their lives.
The image of science is on the rise. Science is really having a moment during the pandemic. What we found is the trust in science and scientists is the highest it has been since we began conducting the survey in 2017 and reported the first one in 2018. And COVID-19 is a key factor. What we found is that skepticism dropped for the first time. It had been trending upwards, actually, but it dropped for the first time during the pandemic. And then trust in science went up. Trust in science actually rose to 89%, which is up 4 points from pre-pandemic. And trust in scientists has risen to 86%, which is up 6 points from pre-pandemic. So trust has always been high, but these kind of upswings we haven't seen.
But before the pandemic hit, why did so many people across the globe believe that if the field of science were to halt in its tracks, their lives would be no different?
What I feel is people just don't realize that science is behind almost everything, from the moment you get up to have your coffee, to sit in your car, to pop your blood pressure pill, to ride in the elevator and get to your office. Now, during the pandemic, it has visibly played out. Okay, science for information, science for protection and all the PPE measures, science for prevention, science for medication, and science for the gift of vaccination. So I think, again, it's because of the way it has publicly played out, science was in the conversation.
The pandemic has revitalized the importance of science in the public eye. From the development of a vaccine to treating those with COVID-19, the contributions of science are front and center. Looking ahead, Seth believes that those working within the field need to be more vocal advocates of its importance to society.
It's very serious, right? If the world doesn't value science, if science isn't appealing, if it's not a priority, then we risk fewer scientists, because there'll be less investment and the world is less prepared to deal with problems that only science can solve. And the future of science and the contributions that science makes to society depends on the public being favorable. So it impacts the STEM pipeline. You know, how many kids are excited about science, technology, engineering, and math. So if they're not going into STEM fields, it impacts that pipeline. And these are the very scientists we need to solve future global issues.
Caitlin Sullivan echoes the sentiment put forth by Seth. Sullivan is the Director of Outreach and Equity Programs at the nonprofit organization Society for Science.
It's important that students hear someone who's knowledgeable about science talk about science and their beliefs about science. Because if you've never learned anything else, if you've never heard anyone say that science is real or that science is important, then of course you're not going to believe that it's important or real. And so this is an opportunity for us to really tap into teachers who do believe in science, who do think that it's important and vital to our country and obviously to the world, as evidenced now more than ever. And so it's our opportunity to make sure that every student hears that and has the opportunity to experience it.
In part, the group's mission is to expand science literacy and STEM education for underrepresented students from low-income families. Their platform for achieving this is called the Advocate Program.
One of the goals of that program is to make sure that we have teachers of diverse backgrounds who are supporting these students. For our Advocate Program, we have not only teachers, but we also have scientists, informal educators, museum professionals, folks who are in these communities with the students who can really support them and give them the extra support that they need that maybe their peers already have in other ways. Their specific goal is to help 3 additional underserved students to enter our competitions. But many of our advocates, they're different types. So many of them are culture shift advocates, and they're working with students to make sure that once they go on to college and they start to pursue STEM careers, that those students then come back and talk to the younger students so that it becomes part of the culture in those communities, that students enter these competitions, that they do these research projects to make their own discoveries about the world. And so in that way, those students become advocates within their own community.
Sullivan says that 47% of advocates work with Latino students, 47% with African American students, and 6% with Native American students in remote areas.
We have a student who ended up discovering a planet, an exoplanet, in 2 of our different programs. We have a wonderful advocate in New Mexico whose students created a pesticide out of chili powder, and they tested them on worms, on flatworms, and they ended up winning the New Mexico Governor's Challenge. And my favorite memory is just that they kept sending me pictures of worms. Worms with chili powder on them. So it's fun just to see their excitement about their project.
And typically, girls, too, need more direct encouragement from their teachers to explore STEM fields that traditionally have been predominantly male.
We need all sorts of diversity of thought and experiences in order to creatively solve the problems we face, not just healthcare, but also environment. So this idea of encouraging everybody to participate, I think also works really well, is because it puts science in a very human context. And that is very inspiring, I know, to women. And I say that from my own experience as a kid growing up and my experiences with my daughter. Anytime it was a problem with a human context, she was inspired to solve it, and the science was just a way to get there. So I feel, for women and girls and underrepresented minorities, and there's data out there indicating that they're more inspired by things that make the world a better place. And so this is a perfect opportunity in my mind to sort of collectively step up and say, here are all the problems with a human context, and inspire and encourage and support all women and underrepresented minorities to pursue STEM and careers in STEM because we need them.
Both 3M and the Society for Science feature science projects on their websites that young people can conduct at home. You can learn more about these activities and this topic, as well as both of our guests, Dr. Jayshree Sait and Caitlin Sullivan, by visiting our website at viewpointsradio.org. This segment was written and produced by Polly Hansen, studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson.
Viewpoints returns in just a moment.
For those who qualify for Medicare, fall open enrollment is underway now. If you pay out of pocket for prescription drugs, choosing the right Medicare prescription drug plan can help save money. Picking a plan that fits your needs can be a simple process with these tips and by working with a trusted partner like Walgreens, who has a number of tools available online and in store. First, evaluate your plan every year as coverage and benefits change. Also, talking to an independent insurance broker can help, which is why Walgreens teamed up with eHealth, an independent fully licensed insurance broker, to offer free advice, which may save you hundreds of dollars and no obligation to enroll. Last, check if your pharmacy is in your plan's preferred network. A Walgreens pharmacist can help lower costs by finding generic alternatives or a lower-cost brand name medicine to treat the same condition. Visit walgreens.com/medd to learn more and get started. That's walgreens.com/MEDD.
As many as 89% of hospitalized COVID-19 patients are at risk of a complication called cytokine storm, a leading cause of COVID death. But there's good news. Hospitals across the U.S. are enrolling patients in a trial evaluating lenzilumab, an investigational treatment designed specifically to stop this storm, even with only 1 day of treatment. Dr. Cameron Durant, CEO of Humanigen, the company developing lenzilumab.
Having a therapeutic that can significantly reduce the time to recovery from COVID-19 and send patients home earlier could dramatically impact the arc of this pandemic.
Participating in the study means access to a potential treatment option in addition to standard of care therapies. Trial participant Mark Baranski shares his experience.
I don't know if I received lenzilumab or not, but I viewed the trial as doing everything I could for my recovery while contributing to the fight against COVID-19. I certainly encourage others to do the same.
To learn more and find this trial near you, visit StopStorm.com. That's StopStorm.com.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Viewpoints is a production of MediaTrax Communications. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows. And find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints. Coming up next week.
There were police officers coming 80 miles an hour down the street from every possible angle you can imagine. We were trying to get kids out of the street because kids were almost zombie-like, like walking back towards the school.
Revisiting the deadliest school shooting in U.S. history. Then,
about a third of all marriages today in the United States were generated by matches made online. I think that's a perfectly good thing, but it's a different thing.
The sweeping societal changes in a tech-driven landscape. I'm Marty Peterson.
and I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.